Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Really excited to see a full house already at the kickoff. So appreciate everyone joining early. And we have a great panel discussion today. And I think we're going to have a lot to say. So let's just jump into it right away. I'm Cassie Powelson, VP of Marketing here at Unit 21. And we have four really great panelists today. To speak through, our goal of today is kind of cut through the hype of AI and really give you some tangible examples and questions to ask when you're evaluating and when you get that pressure, perhaps from above, of invest in AI. So we've brought together a great panel of experts to have that discussion. Before we jump into introducing them, I skipped some of the logistics. We are recording. It will be available at the same website page later today. If you're having any technical difficulties, scroll down to the bottom of the page and there's some frequently asked questions that we tend to see coming in. Otherwise, there's a chat and a Q&A tab. So please do ask questions throughout. If they are relevant to what we're talking about, we will absolutely address them right then and there. And we will hold 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So also, lastly, there is a resources tab for some additional learning opportunities for each of you around what we're discussing today. So without further ado, let's introduce our speakers. First off with Trisha, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Kothari, founder and CEO of Unit 21. We do anti-money laundering and anti-fraud software. Very fortunate to work with amazing companies around the world like Chime, Intuit, Brax, Rippling, Crypto.com, Circle, and a ton of banks and credit unions as well. I'm really excited about this topic because we have done a lot of work on agentic in the last 12 months or so and have seen a lot of what's real and what's not real. So excited to share our learnings here.
Great, I'll go next. I'm Brady Harrison. I lead strategy and execution for Equifax's fraud and identity business. We cover all of the classic bureau activities and then expand as well, our integrated solutions around identity, compliance, payments, and chargebacks. So cover the full gamut in our role here, and really excited to talk with the assembled group around what's really the juice for a customer from an operational and hype from reality.
Hi, everyone. I'm Guy Huber. I'm a principal at FS Vector based out of New York. FS Vector is a consulting company that focuses in the fintech and banking as a service space. We advise clients on product launches, compliance programs, chartering primarily. And before that, I was a consultant at Promontory Financial Group for about 10 years, where I helped larger banks with regulatory compliance, mostly related to fin crimes. As I'm sure everyone on this call and watching from your office at home knows, AI is certainly everywhere. We're helping clients that are looking at in-house as well as vendor solutions that bring AI capabilities to financial crimes workflows as well as onboarding, both in the fintech and the BaaS space. And we also work with some vendors themselves in terms of right-sizing and tailoring their offer for the market. So really looking forward to talking about all that further.
And I'm Filip Verley, Chief Innovation Officer at Liminal. We are an actionable intelligence platform where we monitor over 9,000 companies in 5 universes: fraud and compliance, trust and safety, risk management, cybersecurity. And this is, generative AI is the #1 question we get. What should I do to combat the bad? But then on the flip side, how do I actually work with these AI agents to make my life, more efficient, more easy? So this is the topic we hear constantly, and I'm super excited to be part of this conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to jump right into a poll to gauge where everyone is in their adoption and understanding of AI. So if you can go to that poll, and we will see the answers coming in. the question, have you deployed AI agents in production?
I'm always excited to see people who are like walking the walk versus talking the talk from a user perspective, who's like, everyone's
That's what we
talking
should
about
have
it. Like, who's doing it?
asked. Awesome. Okay, well, we're settling out, planning to do that by the end of this year. I would love to open it up to the group. You know, I know everyone here is talking to a ton of companies thinking about this. So how does that settle for you? Is this a surprise? I think, Brady, to your, you know, comment, is it cutting through the hype of reality? You know, so yeah, open it up to the group, and how does this sit with what you're seeing?
I could kick it off. I would say the one thing that stands out to me is like no plans to do so in 2026 is kind of surprising to me, especially 21%. It's a decent number of folks that are like, you know what, I'm not going to do this. Is it a skill? Is it a skill thing? Is it hey, I'm not sure what I'm getting into? Is the market moving too fast for you to get your feet under you? So I'd love to get more understanding of who is not going to plan to do this, because it feels like everyone we talk to is like, yes, we have a plan to go do this. We're just holding back because we are still trying to understand who has the goods versus who's marketing what they have. So that one stood out to me right away, as in like, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah, just to add there, I wonder if part of this perhaps reflects organizations that are taking a cautious approach, but piloting something internally that perhaps is not in production. But if we were to slightly reframe the question, it might turn out that, you know, we expect to be live with something in production very, very early in 2027 or thereafter. I mean, my perspective and what we've seen in terms of our fintech and BaaS clients is there is already something that is branded agentic that is somewhere in their flow today, typically with a high degree of human in the loop oversight, or perhaps even parallel pathing. As you move up the chain in terms of financial institution size and maturity, there are task force, you may call them, that are there might be one for financial crimes, there might be one for first line KYC, that are moving a little bit more conservatively in terms of building the use case, identifying the necessary tech stack, bringing their regulators along for the journey. And so 2026 for something in production might be a little bit aggressive, but would expect to see that coming down the pipeline. So again, you know, a surprising data point, but maybe there's more to the story there.
Yeah, I was going to call out that about 2/3 of the audience, about 64%, has either just deployed AI this fiscal year or is planning to do so by the end of the year. So we're still in very much the day one, or day zero rather, of AI. Very few people have used it for a year. Even the ones that have used it for 6 months are just starting to know what, you know, really get out of that POC phase. So that's really interesting to me that we're still in the very first innings of AI.
Absolutely. I think on that note, Trisha, you recently wrote an article around, you know, AI is so much more than a checkbox. And I think, like, to dive into the first question, how can you cut through that hype? Like, how are you, I'd love for you to share that perspective and open it up to the group of just like, you know, what is the right expectation of AI when it comes to, you know, dipping your toe in the water?
Yeah, great question. And you know, we've been experimenting as a company with AI since ChatGPT came out. We've been trying different versions of it and seeing how we can put it in the product. And I'll be, you know, very honest. We had a few versions of AI before we launched our key agentic AI product last year, and those previous versions failed. And they failed because they were basically a chatbot. It was a ChatGPT wrapper. And you know, ultimately, it's like, okay, if you're an AML investigator or fraud investigator, you're reviewing your alerts. Now it's one more task for you to do. You have to go in and type another question, and no one wants to do it. And that's when we realize that we have to just position it completely differently. We have to not just add AI as a layer on top of the existing workflow, but reimagine that if we had to rebuild this from ground up today, what would that look like? And so last year we launched two of our agentic AI products, one on the investigation side, which reviews alerts, and the second on the rules side, which recommends rules. And we've seen tremendous adoption. The difference this time with what we did versus the previous failed versions was that it wasn't just a chat GPT wrapper. We actually used a lot of our data that we have from the last 7 years to build strong eval sets or training sets of data to make sure that the accuracy is at 98+% levels. We went to regulators and demoed this before we even went to market with this. And then we had AI that actually did the work. And that's our biggest learning, is that it's very easy to slap on ChatGPT. A lot of vendors are going to do that because they have to tick the checkbox in the RFP saying that they have some AI capabilities. But they're not really rethinking that, okay, how do you get this? If you had to build it from ground up, what would that look like?
For us, that's the similar approach. Is like, it's really easy. I'm sure everybody has been seeing that little AI icon in all of their apps that people are like, oh, I'll just add a chat interface, agentic wrapper over this. But is it really improving like the end result? And in this case, it's like a volume of alerts for transaction monitoring that need to get addressed. And like the chatbot on the side, that side of desk assistance is really not driving kind of the operational lift that people see as agentic as really the move, right? As people are talking about AI from this like operational paradigm shift from, how much we can do and the quality overall. And if it's really not hitting those buckets, it really more is just a wrapper dressed up, right? Is it really driving, operational efficiency overall? And I think we've seen in the market writ large that people talk about that they implemented AI to drive some efficiency. And then a couple months or quarters later, they walk back and it's like, oh, actually, we didn't really do the real work building this from the ground up to really solve, what a BSA's officer's true problem is like, I have more of these things than I have the resources to manage.
I think there's an interesting test maybe that springs to mind, and this is perhaps a little oversimplified, but for some of these bolt-on solutions, what we saw at FS Vector is that when you take a step back and you look at the workflow end to end, the workflow hasn't really changed. The widgets, the alerts that your analysts or your investigators are looking at are substantively the same. They haven't really changed. Your team is structured the same. They may be working a little bit faster, and perhaps with some of these chatbot implementations, that's how much faster are they working is also a question. But structurally, organizationally, in terms of workflow, it's actually hard to point to what's different pre-AI bolt-on versus post. And I think when you start looking at some of the more mature, innovative, agentic, from the ground up type solutions, you start to see more of those end-to-end changes.
Filip, I think from your perspective of being able to see a wide scope of hundreds or thousands of organizations through Liminal's research, how can you see through that vaporware? How can you see? Are there any aggregated trends you can provide or advice for folks as they evaluate AI?
It's if I could snap my fingers and say yes, I have that answer. We'd be $1 billion company tomorrow. It is extremely hard still to this day. One of the things that we're seeing, we did a demo day. This is now maybe October, and I reached out to 50 companies to say, hey, we're doing an agentic AI demo day. We'd love to have you join. Only about 9 or 10 picked up the invitation and said, oh, we have something great. And we're like, it's called demo days. So we want to see a demo of your product. And only about 2 were actually able to demo a product versus slideware. So even at that point, it was like, well, I kind of got bamboozled as well, because I was like, oh, you have something, that's awesome. But you don't. And so one of the things that we're really pushing on is a taxonomy. Can we all speak the same language? Because when you say, oh, I work with agentic agents, are you entering your, as you mentioned, Trisha, it's a chat GPT bot. Are you asking it some prompts, some simple prompts? That's not an agentic agent. And then the other distinction is, what type of agents are you talking about? Because you have a lot of agentic AI for commerce, and now you have these workforce agents. So you really got to distill down to like trying to understand and figure out, what are you saying when you say this? So I think that is step one, where we're still trying to get everybody to speak the same language, so we can all anchor on that. And then we can start moving forward to say, okay, so you say you do workforce agents. Awesome. So you're going to help me with my sanction screening? Are you going to help me with my AML transaction monitoring? What are you doing? Oh no, I have a chatbot that you can ask questions. Well, again, that is not what I'm asking for. So it is still this industry, this space is moving so quickly. Every couple weeks, you are getting more information. You're gathering more information. The landscape changes again. And so that, again, is also, I think, maybe hesitation on the buyer side is like, well, if I wait another month, is it going to get better? And maybe I'll get that next tool out again. So cutting through the noise, today is still taking a ton of time and effort that you really have to investigate, versus some of the, other spaces we look at, like KYC. Back in my hand, I can really understand that. And I can really understand if someone has the goods or they don't have the goods. This one requires detailed conversation, speaking the same language, and really get into the bottom of it. I know that was a non-answer because I don't have the great answer yet, but we are working on like trying to really understand the space.
Yeah, I love the example of the demo day though. Guy, how about from your perspective when consulting, like any kind of gotchas or things that you've noticed when advising clients?
The definitional question that Filip raised is something we run into very frequently and is really top of mind. There's a mix of folks that will be on these calls. You have technical expertise and subject matter expertise. Then have people that know enough to be dangerous, but perhaps on some of the more innovative agentic use cases, the real nuanced understanding of how the LLM works is a little bit lacking. And I by no means do I hold myself out as an expert. And there are vendors that are offering something that they label agentic because agentic is the hot thing right now, versus vendors that have done the heavy lift to actually really think through structurally what their agentic platform can offer and how they'll work with buyers over a long-term partnership to bring agentic for one use case, but very thoughtfully for the next use case. So I just want to say, like, the definitional piece, I couldn't agree with more. I don't think that there's a shortcut to being able to cut through the chaff in terms of doing this due diligence with vendors. And I think the common pitfalls or the common opportunities are ones that have been in place for some time now related to technical demos. In my experience, the demos often have really sanitized, happy path use cases that they're going to walk you through in the tool. And that's great. But where rubber really meets the road is show me an unhappy path. What do the edge cases look like? And really prodding on that. And to an extent, the buyer coming with a good sense of what makes the need that they have challenging or creates edge cases is beneficial, because you can sort of go back and forth a little bit there. And two other things that have come up a little bit in my experience, again, where some of this definitional ambiguity, I think, occurs. Human in the loop is one of those concepts that everyone throws out there, particularly on the regulatory side. And I think pressure testing and walking through exactly how a given vendor's offering works with different human in the loop configurations and expectations is going to make real for you what is agentic about their offering. Where do those handoffs really occur? What can the agent do in decision? And I think pushing on that button is really important. The other piece is explainability. My background is more regulatory. Explainability is probably one of those other big topics that everyone likes to get into: black box versus glass box, et cetera. I think most vendors have a really good, tight answer about how they support auditability, traceability, and explainability. But I do think it's important at the outset to see hands-on how that is handled within the tool, because what you don't want to be left with at the end of the day is needing a PhD in technical documentation to read and interpret the agent decisions. You need some narrative, plain English, plain language gloss that connects those dots. So I just add those two lines of questioning, which are probably obvious, but just to double down and emphasize, I think really critical.
Awesome. I'm going to jump into this one question that came in. I think it'll take us off track, but I think it's a good one. Is whether you're seeing clients build AI agents in-house or purchasing existing solutions. I think let's kind of dive into that, and I will open it up to anyone that wants to jump in. But I know you guys will each probably have perspective. So.
I can start here, right? There's a lot of opportunity for agentic use cases within a business. It's certainly something that's low stakes, would be like managing your CRM and moving kind of tools and tasks around is a great use case for an internal build because the cost of failure is relatively de minimis, right? A couple messed up reports maybe. On the agentic side for sanctions and transaction monitoring, this is probably where I think people are a little bit reluctant because the fail scenario is so challenging. And as Guy mentioned, the explainability, auditability is not an easy task to kind of meet and maintain for something that you build internally. The last question is, like, are you an expert in this area is the question that I always try to drive from. Like, is this really where you can disproportionately win and drive value here? Or is the opportunity cost exceedingly high, right? You're going to devote a lot of time and energy into the build function, and you may get to the end of a 6, 7, 8 month project, and you could be a year or 2 years behind a more frontier solution, or get something that just doesn't work. So we are seeing people kind of toy with the build their own, and I think that's really interesting in potential other areas of your business, but I am not really seeing people deeply explore the, hey, I'm going to build my own thing from scratch. They do, though, they want to be able to kind of customize something out of the box and say, hey, I may be a different operating procedure or a different checklist that my BSA and AML officers want us to run through, and they want that kind of build. But I would be cautious on the folks who are like, yeah, we're going to go all in on building our own sanctions compliance agent versus, someone who's an organization who's deeply invested and on the edge of doing things in AI is probably a better choice long run.
One thing I'll add to that, Brady, the other thing that we saw in surveys we ran, this is now again from 2025, and as this moves so quickly, but it was a very telling percentage is a lot of companies just don't have the skill sets internally to build these things. So they are going to be looking at, vendors like a Unit 21 who have the skills and the backing to make these things happen. So skill set is a big thing as well. As like, yes, everybody can type into the machine. That's awesome. But can you actually create a prompt, or can you actually chain prompts together that make it, actually, useful and relevant? And so a skill set mismatch is there as well, especially if you're thinking about like maybe larger financial institutions who may not be at the forefront of a lot of technology. I'm sure I'm offending a bunch of the, audience here, but it's really missing that big skill set. And I think that, again, you're going to have to recruit a different type of, person to come into your team to really work with agents, building agents, managing agents. So I think, again, there's an opportunity for vendors to really step into that void and say, hey, we have the skill. We've done this. We do this with your competition. Work with us.
Yeah, I fully agree. Or, for us, we've been now building agents for over a year, and we're still building it. We have a pretty big team, and we're spending a lot of money on building this, and it's not stopped. I think the truth is that to build a demo is very easy now. To build something that looks flashy, you can easily do it within a day and get people excited. But to build something that's accurate, that requires actual data to help fine-tune the models, to actually build something that is complex, like we had to invent this multi-agent, multi-model architecture where we use different types of models for different tasks. So as an example, Claude or Anthropic is really good for transaction analysis tasks, but Mistral is really good for, if you have a document, a PDF, and you want to read that. So we have different agents for different tasks that we've orchestrated and have an LLM as a judge. So it's just like adding, making a simple call to ChatGPT makes for a good demo, but it's really hard to scale it to be accurate enough that you can actually rely on your operations to run on that. And so what we found, we've seen, some of our customers about 6 months ago, they were like, okay, we're going to try to do this internally. And they come back and they say, this is just like not worth it. We have a company to build, which is not AI, AML, and fraud company. And so we have seen that story play out. We think a better use of time is to get more educated on this topic. It takes 2 seconds for vendors to add AI to their website. It's more important to understand what is real versus not, and to question vendors on do they actually have it in production, and talk to people who've actually used it in production, because it's super easy to get a demo now.
All right, let's get tactical. I would love to talk about some real examples. So, Filip, you threw out sanctions reviews, right? Like, where are you seeing AI agents applied? And then we will do a poll and for the audience and ask them where they're looking to start. So I think, like, where are you seeing it? And then we'll open it up to the audience on where they're thinking. We should have surveyed before and after we share a perspective to see if we change their mind now that I say it out loud. But please, go ahead.
I could stall if you want to throw the poll up real quick. But where we're seeing a lot of activity is in very repetitive tasks that are lower risk. So think of your sanction screening, your negative news, your PEPs, right? Politically exposed persons lists. Those are, yes, they have a consequence if you get them wrong, but they're not as consequential as like, oh, you let a $2 million wire go out to a, sanctioned country because the AI missed it. So it's these low risk repetitive tasks that maybe you call your level 1 reviewers. A lot of companies have already offshored that. They are not doing those onshore anymore. So it's like, if I'm already comfortable doing it with a BPO, then the leap towards an agentic agent that I can instruct, that I can really control and manage, and give it clear instructions on how to resolve these things, that level of comfort is really starting to take off. And that's where we're seeing a lot of adoption. And once that adoption's in, then you can start moving up the chain to maybe more of the more risky or more complicated topics. We're seeing SAR filings, like doing the actual filing text, like the narrative, and still human in the loop on that one. But we are seeing things move up the stack. But again, long-winded way of saying very repetitive tasks that you're either offshoring already today, and that we maybe consider the L1 type of reviews.
Yeah, at FS Vector, we're seeing very similar, that the intro for agentic AI is commonly negative news or PEP or sanctions triage. That's like a very obvious starting place because it's a contained data set at level 1, and it's a good way to get your feet wet, so to speak. And then it's also organizationally easy to move from those list screening use cases to adjacent fin crimes use cases that share some of the same staff, perhaps, or organizational or decisioning structure, but sort of underlying principles in terms of what's risky. And so bringing in the transaction monitoring alerts and other widgets, cases, and SAR filings, as Filip mentioned. The one that we're also beginning to see, but is a little bit more nascent, I would say, are upstream decisioning, particularly related to things like credit underwriting, where there's an agentic opportunity to collate, synthesize broad sets of data and potentially unearth risk signals that may not have been spotted through the old rules engine, or conversely, risk mitigators that without the agent you may have overlooked, and turning a credit denial into a credit acceptance kind of happy path use case for the agents. So that's another sort of more emerging area that started to come across at least my desk.
All right, while I get the poll up, any other, let's see, published, there we go.
Yeah, I'll just quickly share two things. One is that, people often, they're scared of AI. They think it's going to take the job away and what's going to be happening. And what we are seeing also, I'll give an example of a Google search, an online search activity. It takes seconds to do a search, but to click through 10 links, to read it, to write a summary is a 10-15 minute task. So most companies can only do it for the high risk alerts. And what we found is now AI can do things that just previously didn't make sense to do. So now our customers are implementing that across all of their alerts. And that's something that we found to be really effective. It's not just reducing the cost, but also doing more because it never made sense to do before. So yeah, I wanted to share that too.
And just one more thing I wanted to add in as well is like there's a lot of pressure on companies as well to, hey, reduce your hiring because we're investing so much in AI. So again, repeating these repetitive automated tasks, are helping them balance. We will do more work but with the same amount of folks, or we can actually replace those folks and up-level their training to now become that L2, L3 reviewer and do the more complicated, more risky tasks. And so again, I think that also plays into where these are being put because of the investment companies are making in AI. So they are, no more hiring, solve it with AI. Okay, let's start there at least on that front.
All right, these are our results. So I'm surprised to see the case automation and alert triage pretty tied close. I don't know if anyone else has reaction there. A large bucket is unsure still. So that may be why this shook out this way.
The SAR is really interesting to me from the zero. That seems like a really great place where I have this content that's somewhat structured based on, right? It seems like the logical next step of we still want to have a human ultimately make that decision for compliance and other kind of comfort reasons. But it seems relatively straightforward to take that next leap of I produced this material, I'm comfortable that this is, SAR worthy, then have that person type out that SAR is very interesting when that is maybe an easier task than some of the prior motions.
Yeah, this is a really great point. And I'll say that, in our previous attempts of doing AI, we initially thought, oh, SARS is the place. And what we realized, and of course, we have a SAR filing AI agent as well, but we're finding that the higher volume tasks are on the alerts. There's way more alerts in SARs. It's a 100-to-1 ratio typically for alert to SAR. And Brady, I'm wondering if that's the component, but it's just not that high frequency of an activity to file SARs compared to alerts. You have tens of alerts a day that you have to clear.
Not the burning platform, right? You're like, I have this. You're like, oh, I will deal with that in 6 months when I have dealt with my alert and investigations process. That's probably maybe a now zero, but not a forever zero.
Right.
I also wonder if part of it is we're still somewhat early, if not very early here in the agentic journey that we're all undertaking. And there's some regulatory audit exam cycles that are upcoming. And if we were to redo this in 6 to 12 months, there would have been the signaling to the banks and the credit unions and the fintechs that are on the line to say, yeah, you can maybe be a little bit more aggressive in terms of how you are thinking about different agentic AI use cases. And there just hasn't really been the very, very clear regulatory signaling on things like SAR filing necessarily. I don't think that they've closed the door, but I think there's still perhaps a little bit of uncertainty about exactly how far we can go in these early stages. The one that I think is also pretty interesting is the detect AML risk earlier, which is I think one area that I have yet to see really broad adoption, but where I think that there's exciting promise if you think about activities like risk assessments, customer risk rating, ongoing rule tuning and optimization, which are these more periodic activities that everybody has to do, which as someone that's done their fair share of risk assessments take a painful amount of time, and where it feels like there's a real efficiency to be gained from starting to layer in agentic, and still certainly having this human in the loop, human oversight piece. But I think that's really exciting, and I can imagine being a buyer on the end, thinking about how much faster I may be able to do a really compelling risk assessment as being a pretty exciting use case for agents.
There's a really interesting question in the Q&A around rethinking transaction monitoring from like a rule building perspective. Could clients instead define rules in natural language and use AI translating to build that? And I know we're working on some text to rule things. This was not a pre-prompted question that we plugged. So I love this proactive thinking on questioning the fundamentals of a rule building approach to transaction monitoring. I'd love to open that up to the group as well.
Yeah, love this question as well. So when Unit 21 started, our major thinking was that people need to be able to build their own rules easily. So we have this no-code builder. You can easily go create rules, test rules, deploy rules. But it was still within the Unit 21 framework. You still had to learn how Unit 21 works. We deployed this text-to-rule capability where you can write in natural language and then it translates that to a rule. And that's seen really a lot of adoption because people don't want to have to learn how a system works. They just want to have a rule. And that's seen amazing adoption. Another thing that I'd say, which was, maybe in this whole theme of transforming versus just adding AI as a chatbot on top, is on rule recommendations. So we launched this in November of last year after seeing how much agentic AI was being adopted across our customer base, which is a capability that if you have an existing rule, it'll automatically provide a rule recommendation based on your true positives, based on your false positives. And so from an AML perspective, the question is, how can we reduce or from our perspective, the question is, how can we keep the same true positives and reduce your false positives? And this type of exercise companies do, but they do every 6 months to a year. And one of our customers, Rippling, deployed this, and they were able to get a 15% reduction in false positives in the first try. And 15% is not very dramatic, but it's just completely changed the whole game, where instead of a human doing it every 6 months to a year, you just have 15% improvements continuously all the time. And that really starts adding up and compounding to be something quite significant. So that's where we're seeing, this is like when people think of AI, it's still very much in the realm of operations, but it can really have a transformative impact on the detection side of things as well.
For us, we're like this kind of continuous optimization is key. And agentic is a really interesting use case of like, we are living in a rules-based world, not necessarily because that's ultimately the best approach to kind of resolving the problem, but that is what kind of everyone is collectively comfortable with from a strategy perspective. And so if we can't totally move, and I know some folks are pushing towards it, hey, we're going to go all 100% AI. There are no traditional rules scenario modeling. I don't think that's probably going to happen at the largest institutions first. But until then, it's really like, how can I use agents to optimize my current rule-based strategy, or at least provide agentic feedback on a potential strategy? Hey, I'm really interested in doing this. Tell me what that would do across my use cases versus, oh, I'm just going to like make this like fire and forget. And so those two together, right, as long as the paradigm of rules continue to exist, especially in the compliance and sanctions world, right, that is really the place where AI is going to be the most interesting until we get to a sufficient number of institutions who are comfortable with their officers and supervisors saying, oh, we don't do any scenarios. We just use a machine learning model. I would love to be a fly on the wall of what comes next in that conversation with their BSA officer and their regulator of like, so tell me more about that. What I would be quite interesting.
Brady, I think you nailed something there. We said fraud and AML, and we all talk about convergence. Framel's back. Everybody's talking about Framel's back because everybody's getting overwhelmed with fraud, specifically generative AI fraud. It is super scalable, super sophisticated, and the biggest kicker, it's super cheap. And anybody can be a fraudster now, and a pretty sophisticated fraudster right out of the gate. What we're seeing specifically on the fraud side is that static rules it's dead. Static rules are dead. You have to supplement that with more of the AI angle as well, because generative AI can easily bypass static rules. We're seeing it. The only people you're catching are your good customers. And so now you're catching almost none of the fraud. You're upsetting your good customers and you're sticking with your rules. You have to supplement that with these learnings that you're seeing. And so on that, we're seeing buyer sentiment there is at extreme high on, we cannot just do rules anymore. We have to do something more, because generative AI, yes, it will bypass these rules, but it has a hard time bypassing patterns. And so that's where generative AI can really help fight the bad Gen AI. On the ML side, it's a little different because you have that regulatory oversight. You have certain mandates and certain requirements to hit. So it's a little harder to just go say, oh, yeah, I'm going to do it in the black box. You have to have those rules. So again, there's those two conversations on fraud and AML. They're coming together, but they still have different playbooks. And you have to really be aware of those playbooks and not go out there and say, oh, I can solve your FRAML problem. And then you're stuck and you're not catching anything. And you're upsetting the good customers versus catching the actual fraud.
Yeah, I think this is a real game changer for rule detection, what the tools can do. And I completely agree with what Brady and Filip said. The one thing I would maybe add, just putting my AML nerd hat on, having done a couple of tuning exercises, which are always painful, is there's some sort of prove your concept legwork that you have to do to take the regulator along on your journey. And one of those is being able to show, yes, this is how our customer risk typologies are changing, and this is how we've updated our rules, and that's one data set. And the other one is, in our jurisdictions, our regulators are talking about these typologies, and they've published guidance or FinCEN notices or advisories or what have you. It's a huge data dump that you have to wade through. And I think agents can really help bridge those gaps in terms of comparing what we are seeing in our actual data sets, the delta in terms of the regulatory guidance, and pulling it together in a whole strategy that would previously have taken someone just sort of meticulously needing to wade through all of this information and extract something sensible. And that to me feels like low-hanging fruit that can really accelerate things in the very near term. So I think it's great.
Maybe Guy or Trisha, maybe I can ask Cassie. I'm sorry, I'm not going to ask a question.
Please,
I know
do it.
Should whose responsibility is to educate the regulator? We're educating the banks. We're doing all of those things, but should we actually be focusing on them instead? Who should be?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like if the regulator is not okay with this, what's the point? Like, why are we even here? And we've been around for 7 years. So at this point, before we release anything that is really groundbreaking, we demo to the regulators to say, okay, are you going to be okay with this? Otherwise, we're not going to go to market. And it was really interesting with AI. We demoed it to FinCEN, we demoed it to OCC, we demoed it to state regulators, and they don't like ML. They don't understand ML. They're like, what is 8 on 10? Why is it not 8.5? Why is it not 8.2? They're like, why? What are the reasons? The reasons are often not explainable. Like there's the underscores and the reasons. So they're like, I don't understand. Like there are 500 reasons and there are different weights. And AI has almost like leapfrogged that by being really explainable and human readable. And I'd say that was really the surprising part when we demoed it to regulators. They all were like, this is so much better. I don't understand ML, but I understand what you did, what the Google results showed up, what the transaction analysis tasks that you automated, what data you were looking at, and I approve of that. So regulators still have, of course, a lot of questions on how you're training the models, how you're ensuring it's accurate, how you're preventing bias, and we've done a lot of work on this on our end. But I'll say the reception is something that was really positively surprising to us.
Guy, did you want to jump in there at all?
So it's a cliche, and it maybe goes without saying, but I'll just say it anyway so we get out of the way, right? It's key that firms that have those direct regulatory relationships are bringing the regulators along every step of the way. The experts know that, and I'm sure that's what everyone is doing, and that investment is worth its weight in liquid gold. Maybe that's not as heavy as it needs to be. It's worth the investment that you need to be making, and it's really critical. I mean, at larger institutions, right, there's dedicated multidisciplinary teams that are doing this on their AI strategy now, and as you get smaller, it's inevitably a smaller team, and it probably is shared responsibility between the CTO, the CISO, the Chief Compliance Officer, and the BSA AML officer that are providing some combination of like the technical detail as well as the governance and the oversight, and explaining how all of that rolls up within their MRM. I think attitudes about machine learning to AI, to agentic AI now have certainly done a complete 180. I saw what Trisha described, which is a degree of reticence around some of the early ML models and exactly how they would work. And sometimes that's because there's a mismatch in terms of the skill and the background of the examiners versus the teams that are deploying it. And now with agentic AI, I think there's some externalities that are involved in perhaps the change in overall attitude, but also regulatory examination teams stick around for a while and persist beyond administrations. And I think genuinely there's recognition that AI, agentic AI, and Gen AI is a transformative technology on the order of the internet, perhaps to be slightly hyperbolic, but it's real, it's here, it's going to upend how we do business, and that fantastically and perhaps a little bit surprisingly from the regulatory perspective, the vendors, the players in the space have really taken to heart the lessons from the past 10 or 15 years related to the importance of governance, the importance of transparency, and what it can mean if you do it wrong as far as regulatory enforcement. And they're really leading with those value elements as part of their core offering and delivery strategy. So the providers are really meeting the buyers where they need to be in terms of governance, explainability, and transparency. And I think that's giving regulators a degree of comfort that probably wasn't there 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
So what I wanted to, this conversation is going very quickly, so we have 12 minutes. I think we're just going to keep going with it. One of my questions was around how you guys have seen AI, L1 reviews evolve and where you see those headed in 2 to 3 years. And then Diana actually had a great question around, AI is the transformative concept. That means that the process also needs to transform. So how are you looking at L1, L2, and L3, the concepts themselves, and seeing that evolve? I didn't verbatim ask, hopefully Diana, I kind of captured that for you. But let's go there and really talk about how we're seeing that evolve and that concept.
I think part of it is people think of like, oh, we're just going to do less or it'll be totally automated. What we're starting to see is just the expectations are higher, and it's a more with more like analysis. And it's not, oh, I can, have a 90% reduction in, my footprint, but we may ask for more. And over time, regulators may say, hey, we need to be looking at more of these marginal events to, facilitate the goals of a sanctions and AML, program overall. And so we may see the number of, reviews actually increase, but it's really time that may be kind of the forcing function. It's like, well, maybe they used to be, as Trisha noted, a 15-minute exercise. Now with generative AI tools and agents, that's a 1 or 2 minute exercise. And so, what is very likely is staffing may stay similar, but the aperture of what is expected could expand. And so I would expect maybe that we level up what a L1 means a little bit, right? From just like basic matching. And that's always going to happen as tools improve. We're looking at stuff around advanced embedding to like get closer to that. But that as you tune that, you could just find, hey, we found more names that may be closer. or more transactions that are suspect. And so, yes, we're shrinking the human time of like mechanically moving around, but that human in the loop decision surface may actually expand. So if you think a task is 90% operational, 1% or 10% decision, we might now just take, okay, now we're going to do 70% decision surface and 30% operational. And so that L1 may go more of what L2 is doing today, or we're just going to ask for more and have more of that human expertise to actually make the decision until we get to a place that we were talking about earlier from a regulatory scrutiny that they're comfortable with a totally hands off the wheel approach to these, transactions.
I think they're going to be working on the throughput. They're not working on the throughput anymore. They're going to work on the quality. Is the agent, the AI agent, their quality decisions, and first poll. Hey, I'm not going to do this in 26. So in 2 to 3 years, if we pull on that string, we're going to see companies probably in this hybrid approach of like, let me test out an agent, like an AI agent for a couple months, 6 months, 12 months. So I think L1 eventually will be the quality control versus doing the actual work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's risky anyway, but especially when we're talking about something like AI and tech generally, to try and predict what it looks like in 6 or 12 or 24 months. But my sense is what we talk about when we generally talk about level 1 is gonna go away, or at least be replaced by a function that looks substantively different in terms of the work that it does today. I completely agree with Brady when he describes sort of leveling up the work. I think there's going to be a population of complex edge cases that are still going to need that core investigator, deep dive skill set and review. And it maybe is hard to predict exactly where that volume will lie, but that'll be part of it. And then to build on what Filip said, there's the skill set, I think, and if it lives within this function or it lives elsewhere, that gets added is QA, QC over the agentic workflows. And I think you could also layer into that the overhead that's involved with tying that all up in a nice bow. I know I keep hitting on the examiners and the regulatory, but let's add auditors in there, right? There's the documentation that we'll have on an ongoing basis of proving out that our agentic process is sound, that the decisions it reaches are sound. And I think you're going to see this sort of hybrid skill set emerge because there's just not the volume of alerts that otherwise need to be worked down. So I think if you look at it over that long enough time frame, we do start to rethink exactly what L1, L2, and L3 are doing day in, day out.
Awesome. Ryan had a good question here as well. What gives an agent a distinct edge beyond the workflow itself? Is it proprietary data, embedded judgment, something else?
Proprietary data is really like one, high quality training to get really, it's like first proprietary data decision surface, then custom training on top of that is really the differentiator. And then you can kind of start talking about like the alt signal stuff, like the open signal intelligence then also becomes interesting. But for us, the core is foundational data around decisions. That's really the differentiator from, to use a classic moat perspective, is like you can take 10 million SAR filings or what the regular format is, but having someone who's seen 10 million SAR filings filed or 10 million alerts decision is going to be a huge level up on somebody who's like, well, I downloaded the schema that Guy mentioned, like the 1,000-page document of like what scenarios look like, and then I just gave that to a training and then I trained a model, right? That's way different than I have that plus hundreds of thousands or millions of real life events and edge cases to train on. So for us, data is really the differentiator here.
Yeah, I'd say there are 3 core pillars. One is what Brady said, which is data. Ultimately, the way these AI agents work is you have these eval sets, which is basically the training data, and that's how you really fine tune and make sure that whatever you are expecting is going to be the response. And so for companies that have never done it in production, or they just have a demo, they're not really creating that training set for it to yield that accuracy. The second is the customizability, which is not quite, I would say, a part of the workflow, but we have now deployed AI agents across so many of our customers, and we don't even have two customers who are deploying exactly the same agent. It's not like, I mean, maybe sanctions is one workflow, which is relatively straightforward. For transaction monitoring, it's not like they have three things. They're like, well, just check these three things. Everyone wants something custom based on their business, their use cases. So customizability to create your own agents is what we found to really resonate. And then the third is the capability for multi-model, multi-agent architecture, where you don't just have one agent, you're not just using ChatGPT or Claude, you're using a multitude of agents. So really you're getting the best in the industry that is available from the research of the foundation models.
All right. With just a few minutes left, I do just want to share. I have one hot take for each of you guys to end on. So, if there was a single most important question you should be able to answer before you deploy an AI agent, what would that be?
Liability.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I cut you to it, Brady. I jumped the gun. But liability, who owns the mistakes? Which is it? Is it the company that installed it? Is it the vendor that gave it to you? Is it the actual LLM? It was it Claude or OpenAI that made the mistake? I think being able to understand liability on this, because that is, again, we're glossing over that right now. We're glossing over the the identity of the agent, tying it to somebody, but then also this liability angle. Sorry, Brady, I cut you off.
Oh no, I was going to say, setting the obvious aside of like, this works, is secure. My one hot take is this actually driving value and improvement in your organization, right? Everybody's like super hyped about AI. And then I say moving buckets, and it's like, what is your token cost, right, overall? So someone's like, oh, I built this AI agent, it's great, and I reduced case time by like 99%. And I was like, well, what's your CapEx on tokens? And you're like, well, I generated 2 billion tokens to solve one alert. You're like, well, great. But like, does that really move the business forward from a scale efficiency standpoint? Setting aside the hard stuff of like, this actually has to be compliant, explainable. And so I was like, okay, hopefully those are table stakes with any question, but that's generally the unfun, but very first thing you should have to ask.
So I was going to say who's responsible for the agent decisioning, and Filip beat me to the punch there. I agree. I certainly agree with what Brady is saying as far as the cost benefit analysis, and that's something that you need to look very closely at. But I do think ownership of the agentic decisioning or the AI decisioning is really a key thing that you need to make sure you have solved first. And perhaps I would just add a little bit of detail in terms of how I think about that. This is certainly relevant to US-centric firms, but perhaps is more relevant as you start to think about international cross-border use cases. You need to understand how that person or persons prove and evidence that the AI system is operating within all of the relevant frameworks and across each of those jurisdictions, right? And that starts to touch on things like privacy and confidentiality, which is probably its own webinar series that we can get into as part of a fast follow. But wanted to throw that out there because I do think ownership of the decisioning and being able to show how we've been thoughtful about the risks that go along with it is the first principle to start with.
I would say the first question to ask before deploying an agent is, if you work with a vendor, is, do you actually have this deployed with live customers and I want to talk to them? There's a lot of vaporware out there, and the only real way to get to the truth is talk to people who've actually got value from it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much. I wish we had more time. Sounds like we may have prompted ourselves for a part 2 based on where the conversation is going. But Unit 21 will be doing a product demo of our AI in the coming weeks. So I put it in the chat here. You can also scan if you would like to see ours in action. So thank you guys so much for joining. I know we didn't get to some of the questions, but we will follow up and everyone will receive the recording. So thank you guys, Brady, Guy, Filip, Trisha, so much. Really, really amazing discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.